Imagine a red double-decker bus rolling through the heart of London. It's emblazoned with the words, "We send the EU £350 million a week. Let's fund our NHS instead." What would you think? Would you believe in this promise? After all, who wouldn't want this much money redirected to the struggling National Health Service? The promise is clear, and the message is bold. But is it true? Well, unfortunately, we don't need to imagine any of the above, because this is exactly what happened as part of the Leave's campaign for Brexit in 2016. Look for yourself. Why did Boris Johnson decide to use a lie for his campaign? But most importantly, what was the impact of this deception? Let's find out. In 2016, during the referendum on Britain's exit from the European Union, the Conservative Party played a game called strategic lying. They played it again later during the Conservative Party's general election campaign of 2019. What are we actually implying? When Brexit was finalized and the Leave campaign celebrated its success, Dominic Cummings, the chief advisor to Boris Johnson, admitted to a shocking statement. He stated that the Leave campaign's success was due to two key slogans. "We send the EU £350 million a week. Let's fund our NHS instead." And Turkey, population 76 million, is joining the EU. These are pretty effective statements, but that's all they are. At the end of the day, these statements are serious misinterpretations of the facts. You see, these examples are not fake news. They're not disinformation either. In fact, as some researchers suggest, they can be best described as wicked content. This phrase clarifies the essence of strategic lying, but it leaves out some important aspects of how it fits into the larger agenda-setting plan. Take the first claim that Britain sent £350 million a week to Brussels, money that could be better spent on the NHS. Remain campaigners argued that this was deliberately misleading. They pointed out that after accounting for rebates, grants and subsidies, the UK's net payments were actually less than half of the £350 million figure. Plus, there was never any guarantee that any profit or savings made from leaving the EU would actually be directed towards the NHS. But Leave campaigners didn't budge. They were too blinded by the possibilities. They insisted that the UK's annual gross bill did indeed amount to £350 million, despite subsequent deductions. Even more, they insisted that diverting EU money to the NHS was an idealistic goal, not a pledge. It was one possibility of where the money could be used. However, every time this claim appeared in the media, it reminded the audience of the original assertion, not the rebuttals. Early in the campaign, Boris Johnson was questioned by independent television news over the £350 million figure, and the interview received a lot of airtime. His response, which emphasized the alleged cost of the UK's EU membership, helped to raise and maintain the issue. Proponents of Brexit were also very engaged on social media. Studies revealed that there were 1.75 to 2.3 times as many Leave users as Remainers on Twitter, and that their activity level was higher. On social media sites like Facebook and Instagram, Leave activists also had a sway. Their online conduct, which was characterized as more passionate, active, and outspoken, greatly aided in the campaign's success. However, the ends don't justify the means, and Cummings is still not ready to accept the damage his campaign did. Did he admit to lying about his campaign slogans? The chief strategist, Dominic Cummings, eventually acknowledged that the £350 million figure was not intended to be true. Rather, the intention was to spark debate and maintain the news agenda centered around this problem. The statement was untrue, but that was immaterial. You see, the goal of strategic lying is to create a statement rather than to provide accurate facts. The assertion was called a brilliant communications ploy by Cummings. He added that the Leave campaign was able to win a victory by shifting enough votes thanks to the phrase, "Turkey, population 76 million, is joining the EU." Both assertions are instances of emotional priming as they play on feelings of xenophobia and terror. Former editor of the scientific magazine Nature, Philip Ball, said that Cummings' strategy seems to be about disseminating false information or fabricating facts, and then handling the fallout afterwards. Worrisomely, Cummings said nothing about the potential damage to public confidence or the growing skepticism surrounding accuracy assertions in political discourse. The Leave campaign's deliberate deception produced indeterminacy or a sense of confusion about troubling facts. This can undermine confidence in online news sources and increase harmful ambiguity in divisive discussions. Every time the Remain campaign attempted to refute claims, they unintentionally repeated them. Simply by being repeated, this unintentional amplification can give strategic falsehoods legitimacy. However, from the standpoint of calculated political campaigning, it was entirely planned. The Leave campaign foresaw and took advantage of the mainstream and social media's amplification of their falsehoods. Journalists were involved in this process as well. They gave these remarks support by acknowledging that they may be true and deserving of news attention. This sparked charges of phony balance, in which media institutions such as the BBC were accused of providing deceptive assertions made by Leave campaigners with equal weight and credibility to rebuttals from experts or fact-checking groups. And voters became more aware of bogus claims as a result of this type of publicity. Now, what was the truth behind this claim? And what other lies has Boris Johnson told about Brexit? Now, before we get into all of that, don't forget to click on the subscribe button to stay updated with all facets of the truth. Featuring the Vote Leave emblem, the phrase, "Let's take back control," and the assertion that we contribute £350 million a week to the EU, the bus assured the people of Britain that the funds would be utilized to fund our NHS instead. Though even in its own time, the figures were questioned, it became the centerpiece and most well-known pledge of the Vote Leave campaign. It was more like £250 million, according to Full Fact, because of the rebate. The rebate is a reduction from what the UK would otherwise be responsible for. Margaret Thatcher secured this refund in 1984, and without the UK's consent, changes to its calculation methodology are not permitted. The closest, if not perfect comparison, is that £350 million is comparable to the amount that is displayed on a grocery store till before discounts are applied. It's never yours to pay, and you never owe it. The amount is only a first step toward the complete cost. Full Fact also issued a warning, saying that the impact of the economy from changes to trade after leaving the EU is likely to be far bigger than savings from the UK's membership fee. The warnings went unheeded, and as a result, 6 years of ambulance waiting times are thought to be the longest on record, as is the longest cancer treatment program in England. In 2022, it was also claimed that over 1,000 people per day were waiting at A&E for at least 12 hours. And the cost of all is still being covered by the general population. Nigel Farage, who was more directly linked to the Leave EU campaign than Vote Leave, renounced the vow the day following the Brexit vote outcome, calling it one of the mistakes made by those who wanted us to leave the EU. According to a June 2016 Ipsos Mori poll, almost half of British people agreed with the assertion. After 2 years, Theresa May had promised to increase funding for the National Health Service and had stated that some of the increased funds would come from the Brexit dividend. The proposals called for an increase in the NHS budget of £20.5 billion by 2023. The government stated that this increase would be financed by a combination of tax increases, economic growth, and funds that are no longer going to Brussels. Did it actually happen? Did NHS actually get the funding it was promised? Well, in actuality, since 2016, the NHS funding, in England alone, has increased by more than £350 million every week. In actual terms, it increased by £400 million every week between 2015 and 16, the year before the referendum, and 2019 to 2020, the year before the COVID-19 pandemic. However, here's the thing. This budgetary rise had nothing to do with taking savings from leaving the EU. It could have had something to do with the political fallout from Brexit. The economic effects of Brexit have been about as bad as expected. Borrowing, taxation, and departmental budget cuts have all been necessary to finance spending. While this may appear to be a substantial rise in financing, the budget of the NHS is so large that this is really not an extraordinary rate of increase. In fact, it's barely kept up with the aging and expanding population. In comparison to comparable systems worldwide, the service has invested a startlingly small amount on buildings and equipment for much of this time due to financial constraints. After Brexit, the people did not get the revolutionary sum they'd hoped for to stop healthcare issues. In fact, Brexit made everything worse by causing a staff shortage. The influx of new nurses from the EU and EFTA nations abruptly stopped, and the recruitment of dentists also slowed down significantly. In both situations, this was made worse by the implementation of stringent language testing requirements. Like funding, the politics and actual consequences of this were based on a chronic problem caused by domestic narrow-mindedness, a severe shortage of vital staff that started 7 years ago and is still present today. As a result, governments have frequently altered their immigration policies to permit a notably high proportion of employment from Asia and Africa. The scope is astounding. In 2021, the vast majority of recently certified physicians had their training outside of the EU, EFTA, or the UK. This is producing enough medical professionals to greatly increase the number of physicians and nurses, even in the face of the English NHS's persistent lack of workplace planning and an increasing staff turnover rate. In the 6 years after the referendum, the number of licensed non-EU physicians in the UK has increased from 72,000 to 112,000, while the number of licensed non-EU nurses has increased from 67,000 to 124,000. Leaving the European Union caused a new vulnerability that would subsequently be made worse by worldwide shortages of medical supplies, as well as unfavorable blows to structurally weak areas that already existed in personnel and funding. The majority of these issues might be resolved either locally or through talks with the EU, for instance, by addressing the low employee retention rate or securing additional agreements for mutual recognition to facilitate trade in pharmaceuticals across the continent. However, this hasn't occurred, and it looks like it might not occur in the near future as well. As we close this chapter on the £350 million lie, it's clear that the cost of deception is not just financial, but deeply societal. Understanding the past is crucial for shaping a more transparent and accountable future. The promise of £350 million a week for the NHS was a compelling story, but it was just that, a story. The reality has been far more complex and challenging, and it brings us a lesson that political promises should always be verified, questioned, and never taken at their face value. To stay updated on the real impacts of political decisions and to learn more about other pivotal moments in history, subscribe to our channel and check out the related videos at the end of this one. Don't forget to hit like and comment. We'll see you next time.